Tibet. They call it the roof of the world, the land of snows. And indeed it's a land where folklore is well and truly alive, roots running deep into time. Travellers in old Lhasa would hear tales of hungry ghosts that prowl at night, heroic kings born from gods, and the clever animals that would outwit stronger foes. And the stories were not mere fireside entertainment, but they rather carried the history, values, and even the humor of the Tibetan people across generations. So let's today take a journey through Tibet's rich traditions, from creation myths, legendary kings, to spirit-haunted mountain tops. Tibetan folklore really has something for everyone. And of course, we're going to start right from the beginning, with the myths of how Tibet and its people came to be. And I think by the end you'll discover that this tradition is both as playful as it is profound, a window into how Tibetans make sense of their world. So before we begin, allow me welcome you to the channel. If you are new here, I would like to invite you to hit the subscribe button and leave a like and a comment as well, because that helps push the video out to a broader audience, and then more people can enjoy it. And speaking of enjoying this video, you can enjoy it completely uninterrupted and ad-free, just like every other video on this channel. And that is because we are supported by Patreon, YouTube memberships, the merch store, and the occasional donation on Super Thanks or on the PayPal link. Thank you very much. If you want to go and check that out, well, the links are in the pinned comment, video, and channel description. And of course, word of mouth helps us get the channel out there too, so tell your friends. In any case, with all the introduction out of the way, let us begin our time together today and talk about Tibetan folklore. Now, just as promised, I said we're going to start right from the beginning. And indeed, I think you'll agree that every culture on Earth asks where its people came from, how the world was made, and Tibet's answers are among the most interesting and creative. The most famous origin myth recounts that Tibetans are descendants of monkeys and ogres. And according to legend, in a valley near Tserthang in ancient times, a bodhisattva monkey took pity on a wild rock demoness who was lonely. The compassionate monkey, considered an emanation of Avalokitesvara, the Buddha of compassion, mated with the rock ogress, a Raksashi or female demon. From their unlikely union were born 6 offspring, shaggy half-wild creatures who grew up to become the 6 ancestral tribes of what became known as the Tibetan people. The tribes bore names like Se, Mu, Dong, Tong, Dra, and Bro, said to correspond to major clan lineages of early Tibet. But this old story recorded in the Tibetan Buddhist sources, notably the 12th century Manikabum collection, sacralized the Tibetan people's origins. The monkey father represents compassion and enlightenment, taming the feral nature of the ogress mother. And many Tibetans take a sly pride in the story. You see, they jokingly say that it anticipates Darwin. After all, they claim descent from a monkey, but with a spiritual twist, since their primate ancestor was no ordinary ape, but a benevolent bodhisattva. Now, the ogress, for her part, symbolized the untamed land of Tibet itself, initially violent and ignorant, until softened by the monkey's civilizing influence. The Buddhist-infused origin tale became popular after Buddhism took root in Tibet, and that was pretty much from the 7th century onward. Lined the people's pedigree with a new religion. Yet it was not the only story that Tibetans told about their beginnings. An alternative origin myth speaks of an Indian prince named Rupati, or sometimes a king who fled after the great Mahabharata war in India. In any case, this Prince Drupadi led followers into the Himalayas and fathered the Tibetan race, essentially. This legend is less widely known, but it was likely a later attempt to connect Tibet to the epic traditions of India, sort of piggybacking off those more established stories. It never really captured the Tibetan imagination as strongly as the monkey and ogress story, however, which felt a bit more native in its flavor. But still, it's another origin story that we should mention. Now, a little older and more abstract is an indigenous creation myth from the pre-Buddhist Bon religion. That is the myth of the cosmic egg. According to the ancient Bon scriptures, the beginning had only emptiness, a primordial void, but quite a lot of potential. From that pure emptiness arose the 5 elements, that is earth, water, fire, air, and space, or void if we're going to call it that. And these coalesced into a giant cosmic egg suspended in space. From this cosmic egg hatched a primordial being. He's often named Belchen Gecko in Bon texts, a kind of giant or proto-deity. From this first being, creation unfolded in stages. Gods and goddesses emerged from the bright upper part of the egg, while demons and ogres issued from the darker portions. Humanity, in some versions, arose from the mixing of light and dark or from subsequent eggs. Now, this cosmogony, with its dualistic egg of light and darkness, is markedly different from the Buddhist monkey ogress story. Scholars believe the cosmic egg myth reflects Tibet's ancient shamanic heritage and possibly shares themes with Central Asian and Siberian mythologies, since cosmic egg and sky-earth dualisms appear in those cultures too. And yeah, we'll get to them later. Let's just concentrate on Tibet for now. But notably, it lacks a Buddhist morality. It's essentially just a raw creation story of elemental forces. The Bon legend suggests a universe where light and dark, chaos and order had existed rather in tension, but certainly from the very beginning. Now, these competing origin myths show the layered nature of Tibetan folklore. The monkey and ogress tale, though mythical, is framed by Buddhist ideas, compassion, taming demonic ignorance, that kind of thing, and likely helped graft Buddhist identity onto Tibet. Now, the cosmic egg story, by contrast, represents a more archaic worldview that predates Buddhist influence, emphasizing natural elements and an almost evolutionary emergence of life. Rather than seeing one tale as true and others false, Tibetans through history found meaning in all of them. Monks taught the pious monkey ogress story in monasteries, while nomad storytellers might speak of cosmic eggs or heavenly kings around the campfire. It's a rich plurality in creation lore, that's for sure. And of course, all of the other legends are built from this foundation. So let's move on from the origin of the people to the origin of the civilization. Tibetan folklore holds that the first kings of Tibet were not mere mortals, but rather they were semi-divine. In the Yarlung River Valley, where Tibetan statehood first arose, legend says that a heavenly rope descended from the sky to deliver the first king to earth. This king was Yatri Tempo, the inaugural ruler of Tibet's Yarlung dynasty, traditionally dated to be around 127 BCE onwards. Yatri Tsempo's appearance was quite extraordinary. He had webbed, amphibious hands and eyelids that closed upwards, that is, from bottom to top, features so unlike ordinary humans that people believe that he must be a god, or as they say in Iha. According to old chronicles, when locals found this strange being on the sacred mountain Yala Shangbo, they hoisted him on their shoulders in a neck seat and proclaimed him king. And indeed, his name, Nyatri Tsempo, literally means neck enthroned sovereign, commemorating how he was carried aloft. In honor of this divine founder, the Tibetans even count the first year of their calendar from his enthronement. Nyatri Tsempo and his early successors were said to retain a link to the heavens, a magical cord, in Tibetan it's a muthag, extended skyward from the roof to the royal palace, an umbilical tether to a celestial realm, I suppose. Well, as long as the cord remained intact, the king would not truly die. At the end of his reign, he would ascend back to the heavens along this rope rather than expire on earth. So, the first Tibetan kings were considered immortal, reigning on earth for a time and then returning to join their divine ancestors in heaven. And this cycle continued for 6 generations. However, in the time of the 7th king, an impious ruler named Drigum Tenpo, something went awry. Folklore recounts that Drigum quarreled with his ministers, and during the fight, the heavenly cord was severed. In some versions, it was by accident. In others, as a punishment for hubris. In any case, with the sky cord cut, Drigum Tenpo fell to earth and died, becoming the first Tibetan king whose body remained behind to be buried. And after him, all subsequent kings lived and died as mortals, and royal tombs filled the Yarlung Valley. The breaking of the cord symbolizes Tibet's transition from a mythic age of god-kings to the human realities of political rule. Later, Buddhist historians even incorporated this legend, suggesting that the cord was cut by karmic design so that the kings would be subject to the law and impermanence just like everyone else. Well, even though the rope to heaven was cut, Tibetan folklore continued to celebrate its semi-divine figures. The dynasty's greatest hero, Songtsen Gampo, from 7th century CE, is both a historical emperor and a legendary figure in folk narrative. Buddhist lore regards him as an incarnation of Avalokitesvara, the same compassionate bodhisattva who fathered the monkey lineage, by the way. You probably remember the name. Songtsen Gampo is credited with civilizing the Tibetan plateau, conquering tribes, founding the capital at Lhasa, and marrying princesses from Nepal and China who brought Buddhist scriptures and images. Folklore around him often crosses into myth, of course. For example, one popular story holds that in Songtsen Gampo's time, Tibet's land was possessed by a giant demoness lying on her back, whose malevolent influence caused constant obstacles to the spread of Buddhism. To subdue this demoness once and for all, the king and his 2 foreign queens orchestrated the construction of 12 temples across the landscape, positioned on strategic pressure points of the ogress's colossal body. The grand temple Jokang in Lhasa was built over the ogress's heart, which legend says was a lake of blood at the very center of Tibet. And indeed it was necessary to first drain a lake on that spot. Even today, locals point to the marshy ground beneath the Jokang as kind of evidence for this. Other temples pinned down her shoulders, her hips, her knees, hands, feet. When the Jokang foundations were laid, folklore describes supernatural signs. Prince Wencheng, the Chinese wife that is, tossed a ring into the lake and a miraculous stupor of light appeared where it landed, indicating the exact center of a demoness's heart. As the temple construction proceeded, hordes of angry spirits and demons tried to retaliate with storms and hail, but Songtsen Gampo, wielding ritual power, emanated 108 magical emanations of himself to finish the work in a mere 12 days. And once that was done, he called upon protective deities to hold the forces of chaos at bay. At the moment the last beam was placed, the demoness was pinned down and rendered powerless. Tibet, freed from her grip, could then become a land of Dharma, that is, Buddhist truth. Well, this narrative is sometimes called the supine demoness myth, and, well, it's quite rich in symbolic meaning. You see, on one level, it's a geomantic explanation for Tibet's earliest Buddhist shrines. Many real temples, some in Tibet, some in neighboring Bhutan, are said to be part of that original network binding the demoness. On another level, it allegorizes the triumph of Buddhism over Tibet's indigenous demons, perhaps referring to the old gods and spirits of the land. In any case, by pinning down the demoness, the king had tamed the wild land and its supernatural forces, integrating them into Buddhist cosmic order. In fact, the very idea that the land is a living female entity, albeit a demonic one, echoes the older animist worldview, but with a twist that exalts the Buddhist mission. Such stories about divine kings and demons subduing queens blur the line between history and mythology. I'm sure we can all agree that that's quite blurry indeed. But in Tibetan folklore, the founders of the nation are at once flesh and blood ancestors and larger-than-life cultural heroes, and they're remembered not just for their political feats, but for shaping the spiritual destiny of Tibet itself. But of course, we're always framing Tibet in Buddhist terms, but it wasn't always Buddhist. That's the thing. Long before Buddhism arrived, Tibet was, in local belief, still quite brimming with spirits. Towering mountain peaks, those lakes, the rivers, even particular boulders or gnarled trees. Anything could be the abode of some unseen presence. To live in Tibet was, and for many still is, a simple negotiation with a landscape alive and very aware, populated by a vast pantheon of gods, nature spirits, and earth guardians, and don't forget the serpent dragons and hungry ghosts. Tibetan folklore preserves countless anecdotes of these beings, reflecting the indigenous and religious substratum often termed Bon, or simply just folk religion. Now, even today, a Tibetan traveler crossing a high pass will pause at the cairn of a fluttering prayer flags and offer a pinch of tsampa, that is roasted barley flour, to the local deities for a safe passage. This instinct to propitiate and tell stories about spirits of the wild, certainly a direct inheritance from Tibet's earliest inhabitants. Now, one of the most revered types of nature spirit is the mountain god. Across Tibet, prominent peaks are personified as powerful gods or goddesses who protect the surrounding land. For example, the snow-capped Mount Nyenchen Tangda, that is, one rising near holy Namtso Lake, is traditionally hailed as a mighty god. His very name means great deity of the Tangda. In his mythos, Nyenchen Tangda is a warrior god, and interestingly, later Buddhist legends say he was tamed and appointed as a protector of the Dharma by Guru Rinpoche. Folklore tells that Lake Namtso, whose turquoise waters stretched beneath that mountain, is actually the wife of Nyenchen Tangda. Namtso is envisioned as a beautiful goddess, sometimes even described as a daughter of a celestial god Indra, who married the mountain lord. Locals would say that the intense storms which sometimes sweep the lake shores are due to the lovers quarreling, while days of exquisite calm meant the divine couple is at peace. The pre-Buddhist belief system of Tibet is often labeled Bon. We've mentioned it a few times, but we should just clarify the term. Bon in the modern sense is an organized religion with scriptures and lamas, which claims heritage from the ancient shamanistic practice. However, many elements of what we call Tibetan folklore come from much older stratum, sometimes dubbed the nameless religion, essentially a mix of shamanism, local deities, and ancestor cults that likely existed for millennia. In these ancient beliefs, certain priests, Bonpo shamans they are called, could communicate with the spirit world, performing rituals to appease gods and exorcise demons. Sacrifice and offerings were common. The old tales speak of animal offerings to mountain gods to ensure bountiful harvests or victory in battle. There were also blood-curdling rites to summon war gods or bind enemies with curses. While Buddhism later condemned many of these practices, they did not disappear overnight. Instead, they went partially underground, or were syncretized into Buddhist ritual in gentler forms. Tibetan folklore retains traces of shamanic magic in many stories. For instance, a recurring theme is the existence of powerful sorcerer heroes in early Tibet who could control spirits. Some legendary Bon priests, like Drampa Nanka, are credited with fantastical feats too. Things like raising the dead, flying, subduing demon kings, through their arcane knowledge and special magic. In certain folk narratives, a Bon sorcerer and a Buddhist monk even compete in a duel of miracles, reflecting the tension and perhaps mutual respect between the old and new religions. One famous competition was said to have occurred in the late 8th century at the court of King Trison Detsen. The Indian Buddhist master challenged the native Bon priests, and in legend the Bon magicians summoned hailstorms and manifest illusions. But the Buddhist master outshone them by using his mastery of mind and mantra, causing these Bon rites to falter. The king then declares Buddhism victorious, and the Bon priests were banished to the remote borders, thus explaining why Buddhism gained dominance. Well, historically and in strict historical terms, the tale is a symbolic telling of cultural change, but in folklore it survives as a dramatic clash of magic and spirituality. Well, besides gods and sorcerers, the Tibetan supernatural roster includes a bit of a darker cast too. Ghouls, ghosts, nocturnal demons that stalk the unwary. Many of these entities predate Buddhism and personify primal human fears. For example, one eerie figure in Tibetan folklore is the Rolang, literally risen corpse. A Rolang is essentially a Tibetan zombie, a dead body animated either by a sorcerer's spell or by a demon that has taken up residence in his corpse. Unlike the mindless zombies of, Haitian lore, the Rolang in Tibetan stories have a very specific behavior. They lurch around with stiff limbs, unable to bend at the joints, and they seek out living humans to terrorize or infect. Villagers greatly feared Rolang encounters. A wealth of precautions grew around this belief. It is said that traditional Tibetan houses have intentionally low doorways. One must stoop deeply to enter. The folklore explanation is delightfully macabre. A Rolang, being rigid, cannot bend its knees or back, so the low door stops it from entering a home. Much better than just having a lock. While crouching through a door, then, is not only an act of humility but a practical ghost-proofing measure. Protective mantras and threads are also deployed. For instance, tying a 9-eyed cord with 9 knots across a threshold was believed to ward off evil visitors in the night. Small details showing how folklore beliefs filtered into architectural and daily custom, and you can certainly see a few old houses in Tibet even now with those quite low doorways. But we have another vivid ghost tale, still told with quite a few shivers in contemporary times. It shows how terrifying Tibetan folk stories can be. In this story, a young monk goes shopping in Lhasa's market and encounters a mysterious woman selling meat. He bargains with her for a good price, unwittingly offending her in the process by not accepting a free offering that she gave. Well, that night, his mentor notices a strange mark on the monk's hand. It's a demonic sign, and immediately he understands the danger, that meat seller was not human at all, but rather a demoness in disguise, and she has marked the monk to be her victim for the night's ghostly feast. The teacher is understandably alarmed, and he sends the monk on a desperate errand to save his life. Find a certain old beggar woman who lives in a tent by the Ramoche temple, and beg her for shelter for the night. The young monk does what he's told, and after some pleading and offering of food, the old lady agrees to hide him. She conceals the monk inside a large clay beer pot, sealing it with a lid tied down by a sacred knotted rope. And as darkness falls, the seemingly frail old woman suddenly mounts the clay jar like a steed and rides it into the air, flying to a gathering beneath a great tree on the edge of town. Peeking through a tiny hole in the pot, the monk beholds a ghastly sabbath of ghosts, goblins, and witches converging in the moonlight. Some ride on brooms, others on wild animals, and even on beams of light. But they're all grotesque. One-eyed hags, skeleton-thin ghouls trailing their own entrails, fiery demons breathing, and half-invisible fiends flickering in and out of form. All the hosts of hell come together for a regular nocturnal meeting. Now at the gathering, the old woman who carried the monk reveals herself to be none other than the presiding chief of evil spirits, and clearly she is a powerful demoness who, for reasons yet unknown, is helping the monk. She calls for the evening's entertainment. Who is the sheikhal, the meat bringer tonight? Bring forth the meat. And the demoness responsible steps forward, and it's the very meat seller from the market. She announces that she had a special prey marked out, the monk, but to her surprise, he is nowhere to be found, even when she searched the whole city. It's a bit chill, runs down the spine as she mentions she even looked on the lap of the Jowo statue in Jokang Temple, thinking perhaps he sought refuge there, a detail that highlights how desperate the monk's hiding was. The chief demoness, that is the old lady, permits her to continue looking, but slyly instructs her to call out only 8 times instead of 9. The meat hunter demoness circles the gathering, shouting magical cries to flush out hidden humans. Each shout loosens one of the 9 protective knots on the monk's beer pot lid. And inside, the monk is, of course, quite nervous, I suppose, trembling as he hears the rope straining. 8 shouts echo, 8 knots untie. But the 9th, which would have burst the lid, is never uttered, because the chief cuts her off. Having failed to expose the monk, the embarrassed meat hunter rushes off to find alternate prey. Moments later she returns, dragging the limp body of a man, her own husband it turns out, whom she has killed to placate the horde. She flings the corpse to the throng who ravenously set upon it. The monk inside the pot listens in horror to the frenzy. Ghosts reek over the choice organs, and demons gnaw bones and drink blood. A grisly banquet, lit by the fire spewing from their mouths. The old demoness sits atop the pot, placidly presiding, granting herself the choicest of the morsels, the poor man's liver and heart as her payment. And at last, sated and smeared with blood and gore, the spirit army disperses before dawn. The monk has survived, by a hair's breadth. And in the morning the chief demoness, still in the form of the old beggar, releases the shaken monk. She reveals bluntly that she herself is a human-eating ogress as well, and that her merciful decision to save him was a one-off whim. With a parting warning, "There will not be a next time. If I see you again, I'll eat you myself," she sends him back to the monastery. But the tale doesn't quite end there. There's still a grim twist of irony to come. The monk later discovers the meat seller woman wailing in the market because her husband had mysteriously died in his sleep that night. Of course, we know the horrible truth. To save her own skin among the demon company, she sacrificed her husband as the replacement. The story is equal parts horror and morality play. It's a thrilling cautionary tale. Beware of strangers and heed your superiors and teachers' warnings, and also a glimpse into the complex taxonomy of Tibetan supernatural beings. We see ordinary humans who are secretly shape-shifting demonesses, a hierarchy among evil spirits, and even a demon capable of occasional compassion. But it also reinforces a core Buddhist message amid the fright. The power of protective ritual, the 9-knotted cord, and the sanctuary of the compassionate, if demonic old woman who could save the monk, but also the vulnerability of those without such protection, i.e. the unfortunate husband. Well, certainly from these kinds of stories, we can certainly see how Tibetans traditionally interpreted natural events and personal misfortunes. We also can see in the next coming sections how sudden illnesses might be blamed on disturbed Lu or Naga spirits from polluted streams, or strange accidents, or mischievous house spirits, things like this. To appease the angry Lu, people might perform a water offering. To chase off a ghost, they might burn juniper and chant prayers. Now, as for Buddhism, when that arrived, it did not erase the beliefs, but rather just overlaid new meaning upon them. Many of the old gods were declared protector deities, now serving the mission of the Buddha, converted, basically, in their own right. And many demons were subdued and turned into guardians rather than destroyed. The result that we have is a uniquely Tibetan syncretism. One can attend a Buddhist religious ceremony in Tibet and find, alongside Sanskrit mantras to bodhisattvas, offerings of beer to local mountain lords, and masked dances depicting the conquering of demon queens. So the introduction of Buddhism from the 7th and 9th centuries ushered in a new era of folklore, and this time centered on demons, miraculous encounters, and saints. The figure at the heart of many tales is Padmasambhava, lovingly known as Guru Rinpoche. Now, in historical terms, Padmasambhava was an 8th century tantric master from either India or perhaps present-day Pakistan, Punjab area, this kind of thing. He was invited to Tibet by King Trison Detsen to help establish the first monastery, Samye. In Tibetan folk legend, however, Padmasambhava is nothing short of a superhuman sorcerer saint, whose exploits rival any mythic hero. He's credited with conquering the native gods and demons that obstructed the spread of Buddhism, a mission that took on a rich narrative life over the centuries. One well-known cycle of legends describes the building of the Samye Monastery, Tibet's first Buddhist monastery. The effect was said to have been plagued by unseen forces. Every night demons would undo the construction that workers had built during the day, causing walls to collapse and all things to just fall into disrepair. Well, Padmasambhava stepped in to identify the culprits, a horde of local deities and malignant spirits who resented the intrusion of holy Buddhist architecture on their land. Using his mastery of tantric magic, Guru Rinpoche went to battle with the entities. Tibetan oral tradition paints these confrontations in a quite vivid way. For example, Padmasambhava is said to have transformed himself into terrifying, wrathful forms to cower the arrogant spirits, manifestations of fierce Buddhas like Varyakilaya, this kind of thing. He could summon firestorms or trap demons in ritual purba daggers. In any case, one by one he subdued the local gods, the lord of the nearby mountain, spirits of the winds and water, and the subterranean snake spirits. But instead of annihilating them, he bound them by solemn oath. Each spirit had to swear to become a protector of the Dharma, a guardian of the very monastery that they tried to thwart. Now this motive, conversion by subjugation, is quite central in Buddhist lore. It taught that frightening powers of the old religion were not destroyed, but rather harnessed for good. Indeed, Tibet's pantheon of Dharma protectors, the ferocious-looking gods you see in Tibetan temple murals brandishing skull-topped weapons, often are exactly those tamed demonic spirits. The great mountain god of central Tibet, for instance, becomes a protector riding a snow lion. Local warlords of the spirit would turn into defenders of monasteries. Now, one of the most important spirits Padmasambhava subdued was named Peyar, a mighty demonic king. After his defeat, Peyar was installed as the chief protector of Samye Monastery, and later took up residence as the oracular deity of Nechong, state oracle of Tibet. According to legend, Peyar initially resisted and tried to escape Guru Rinpoche by hiding in a lake, but Padmasambhava boiled the lake with magic, forcing him out. The Guru then sealed their pact, and Peyar promised to guard the Buddhist law. And so, to this day, in folklore and ritual, Tibet's state oracle medium enters trance and is believed to have been possessed by Peyar, also called Nechong, who speaks through him. The fact that a pre-Buddhist deity occupies a respected role in the very heart of Buddhist governance, providing guidance to the Dalai Lamas, is just a pretty remarkable testament to the synthesis of tradition. And this arrangement is entirely owed to the folkloric narrative of Padmasambhava's demonic taming. Now, his travels through Tibet gave rise to numerous site-specific legends too. Visit almost any old monastery or sacred cave in Tibet, and you'll likely hear that Guru Rinpoche stayed here, or Guru Rinpoche had tamed the demon here. For example, at Yamdrok Lake, a vast turquoise lake in southern Tibet, local lore says an enormous serpent spirit once menaced the area until Padmasambhava subdued it and pressed it under a rock. A nearby rock bears a handprint which devout folk attribute to Guru Rinpoche pinning the demon down. Likewise, many hot springs are claimed to exist because Padmasambhava scorched a demon or blessed the earth. In the high mountains of Bhutan, part of the greater Himalayan cultural sphere of Tibetan Buddhism, the famous Tiger's Nest cliffside hermitage is built at the very cave where Padmasambhava, according to legend, flew on the back of a magical flying tigress and meditated for months, vanquishing the local demons of the Paro Valley. But it wasn't only Padmasambhava. Other saints and sages also have their place in folklore. Milarepa, an 11th century yogi renowned for attaining enlightenment in one lifetime, which is quite a feat, has a biography filled with what could be called folk tales. As a young man, Milarepa was said to have been a sorcerer who unleashed a hailstorm to kill his greedy relatives, but then later repented and sought spiritual training. In his quest for redemption under his teacher Marpa, folklore recounts how Milarepa faced supernatural trials of all kinds. There is one well-loved story that describes Milarepa alone in a cave, meditating, when demonic apparitions appear to frighten him, leering ghosts and horrifying faces, this kind of thing. But instead of cowering or even fighting, he famously sings a song of realization, in which he just welcomes the demons warmly. Well, the demons are a little bit confused by the compassion and they don't know what to do, so they vanish. Milarepa's inner peace has robbed them of their power. If people aren't afraid, well, the demons can't really do much. Well, in the centuries after Buddhism's establishment, a genre of treasure text legends emerged as well, called terma, and they are quite fascinating. Many Tibetans believe that Padmasambhava, foreseeing dark times, had spiritual texts and objects in sacred places hidden, caves, rocks, and even in the minds of future disciples, to be discovered later by destined revealers called terton. Folklore around the treasures often includes prophetic dreams and encounters with guardian spirits who protect the cache. For example, a terton might have a vision of Guru Rinpoche telling him that on a certain mountain under an oddly shaped boulder lies a buried scroll containing magical power. And when the terton goes and finds it, often a protective snake or demon tries to stop him, leading to a small-scale reenactment of the subjugation drama. These treasure-finding stories blend piety with a bit of adventure, and have ensured that the new old legends periodically enter the folklore stream and keep it fresh. A key point is that Buddhist-inspired folklore doesn't replace the older animist lore, but rather builds upon it. For instance, remember the earlier tale of the demoness that was subdued by Songtsen Gampo's temples. That is a Buddhist-era twist on the animist idea of a living landscape. Similarly, many of Tibet's beloved folk deities, such as Palden Lamo, a fierce female protector riding on a mule, or Tsangpa Karpo, the white god of the Tsang River, are in origin pre-Buddhist gods that were woven into the Buddhist storytelling. Folklore gives them backstories, you see. Palden Lamo, for instance, is said to have been an ogress goddess who was won over to Buddhism and swore to defend it, even as she remains fearsome in her appearance. She became a patroness of Lhasa and the Dalai Lama's guardian. But we cannot leave this topic before going on to the next section without noting that Buddhist morality and didacticism often shone through Tibetan folklore. A ghost story might end with a lama performing rituals to guide the ghost to rebirth, thus once again showing that Buddhist compassion. A demon story often highlights that the demon's true nature was actually ignorance rather than evil, and that can be fixed up by wisdom. Folklore thus became a vehicle for teaching Buddhism to a largely illiterate populace. The fantastical elements made the lessons quite memorable. Yet the beauty of folklore is that even as it carries these messages, it rarely loses the entertainment, the sheer imaginative flair that makes a story stick, whether it's Guru Rinpoche flying on a tigress or a lama wrestling a mountain god into submission. The blend of spiritual and sensational, well, that's the hallmark of Tibet's narrative tradition. Now, at the heart of Tibetan folk culture lies a monumental epic that stands as one of the great oral literary achievements of humanity. That is the Epic of King Gesar. Spanning countless episodes and still performed to this day, the Gesar epic is often called the world's longest epic poem. It's the Tibetan equivalent to the Iliad, the Mahabharata, things like this. Perhaps the Arthurian cycle, too, all rolled into one. So who is King Gesar? In the broader sense, he is Tibet's superhero and cultural warrior king. According to the epic songs, Gesar was sent from the heavens to be born among men in order to defeat evil demons and protect the Dharma in times of great chaos. The epic setting is not exactly historical Tibet, but rather a mythologized version of the inner Asian frontier, often centered on the kingdom of Ling, which many identify with the regions of eastern Tibet, such as Amdo or Kham in the distant past. Yet the stories have timeless, otherworldly qualities to them. They mix early medieval warfare, horseback archers, rival chieftains, with elements of pure fantasy, Gesar's magical powers, visits to god realms, sorcery, etc. Well, the birth and rise of Gesar is a favorite part of the cycle. Legends recount how a ray of light in the form of a golden cuckoo descended into the wombs of a humble woman, and thus Gesar was born under miraculous signs, sometimes the sky raining flowers or an enchanted horse appearing. However, in classic hero fashion, the young Gesar, also called Joru in youth, grew up scorned and in adversity, orphaned or raised by a single mother, mocked by cruel relatives, quite an underdog. In one famous episode, the crafty boy Joru wins a horse race against all the proud warriors of the land by secretly riding a magical steed given to him by the gods. By winning the race, he fulfills a prophecy and is recognized as the true king, and thus he is now called Gesar of Ling. He then takes up leadership and marries his beloved queen, Brugmo. Once enthroned, King Gesar embarks on a series of epic campaigns to subdue the enemies of his people. These enemies are often characterized as demon kings, tyrants who rule foreign lands and embody various evils. And each campaign is a rich story on its own. For instance, one of the most celebrated is Gesar's expedition to the land of Demonia, or as they call it, Du, where he confronts a formidable demon king named To Dong. This demon king of Du had brought misery to many, so Gesar leads his army to overcome trials and enter the fortress of the demon, and after dramatic single combat, To Dong is slain. Upon victory, Gesar does not sack the land. Rather, he converts the demon's realm into a virtuous domain, often described as transforming it into a pure land where Buddhism can flourish and the people can finally live in peace. This theme of turning a demon's kingdom into a just land will reoccur quite a lot, essentially showing that Gesar is not just a conqueror but a civilizer, a kind of liberator in a spiritual sense. Other major episodes include the war against the king of Hor, sometimes identified with the Mongolic tribes, who had abducted Gesar's wife. Also the war against the king of Jiang, often depicted with sorcery as one of the four great demon kings, and campaigns reaching into what are now foreign countries. Legends mention Gesar vanquishing foes in Iran, China, India, even lands as far away as Kashche, which hints at Kashmir or even Muslim regions. In each case, King Gesar and his band of heroic companions, 30 great generals often accompany him, that is, use a combination of martial prowess, skill, and magical assistance to defeat the forces of chaos. Gesar himself is portrayed as an unbeatable warrior, likened to a lion Buddha in some verses, yet also compassionate and wise. Sometimes he wins by strength, other times by clever ruses. For example, in one story he disguises himself to infiltrate the enemy king's court, or he outsmarts a demon with riddles. But one cannot ignore the supernatural dimension of the Gesar epic. Throughout his adventures, King Gesar relies on the favor of the gods. He is said to wield divine weapons, and his personal horse, Kyango Karka, is no ordinary steed, but a celestial one that can fly through the sky or gallop between worlds. In fact, Gesar himself is regarded not simply as a man, but as an emanation of a deity. often linked to Guru Rinpoche or to certain bodhisattvas. In some retellings, he is an incarnation of the Vajrapani, the wrathful bodhisattva of power, or one of Avalokitesvara's fierce aspects. Thus, the epic has a semi-religious status. Gesar is revered in some areas as a protector god in his own right, and it's not uncommon in eastern Tibet to find shrines to King Gesar, with folks burning incense and praying to his spirit for strength or protection. But what is especially remarkable about the Gesar epic is its oral tradition. For centuries it was not a fixed written text, but rather a living cycle of oral poetry performed by bards. These bards, called Srokpo in Tibetan, were and are traveling storytellers who recite the epic from memory alone, often for days at a time, chanting in a sing-song voice without instrumental accompaniment. Many of these epic singers claim a kind of divine inspiration. There are well-documented cases of so-called bab drum bards, meaning visionary or clairaudient bards, who are said that once they begin to sing the epic after experiencing traumatic illness or prophetic dreams. One 20th century bard, for instance, reported that as a young man he fell unconscious during a lightning storm and had a vision of King Gesar's own entourage. When he awoke, he found himself able to recite long passages of the epic that he never consciously learned. Another famous bard, Tsering Wangdu, has been quoted as saying, "Almost every night for the past 60 years, I dream about Gesar. The next day, I record the stories I dreamed from the previous night." And such accounts are quite common, actually. The art of epic singing is viewed as almost kind of a spiritual transmission. The bards often start their performances with an invocation to Manjushri, or Guru Rinpoche, asking for the scrolls of memory to unfurl in their mind. Audiences in nomad camps or village squares listen enthralled, sometimes for a whole winter evening by the hearth as the bard recounts the old stories, and then resume the next evening for the next adventure. Well, because of its oral nature, the Gesar saga has hundreds of regional variations too, and there is no single canonical version. New episodes can emerge, and others can be forgotten or abbreviated depending on the locale and the performer. And of course, it's spread beyond Tibet proper too. Mongolians, for example, adopted King Gesar. Of course, they call him Gesar Khan into their folklore, producing their own versions of the stories with a bit of a local flavor. In Mongolia, he is also a cultural hero who subdues monsters. And in certain parts of China's Sichuan and Inner Mongolia, Gesar storytellers from the Tibetan and Mongur, there's two ethnic groups, keep the tradition alive too. But in recent times, there have been efforts to write down and publish the epic. During the 20th century, teams of scholars in Tibet and elsewhere recorded bardic performances and transcribed them, resulting in Gesar compilations that run to dozens of volumes. One compilation from Tibet exceeds 120, making it one of the largest epics in the world by volume. And in 2009, UNESCO recognized the Gesar epic traditions as intangible cultural heritage, underlining its global significance. But despite being printed, the real substance of the epic lives on in performance. Seeing a Gesar bard in action can be quite mesmerizing. The singer may assume different voices for different characters, use expressive facial gestures, or even burst into spontaneous song or dance when describing celebratory scenes. Some remote communities still treat visiting a bard as a big event. It's akin to a traveling theater and scripture all in one. It brings both joy, but also spiritual upliftment. Well, the content of the epic is not just battles. Sure, it's suffused with Tibetan values and worldview, It extols courage, loyalty, and the triumph of justice. King Gesar is a warrior, yes, but his ultimate mission is to spread virtue and protect the innocent. The stories often slow down to impart lessons. The epic also has movements of humor and humanity. Gesar can be playful, even mischievous. His wife and mother sometimes scold him, showing a homely side to the great hero. And some episodes focus on ordinary people in his kingdom, with fable-like sub-stories that get woven into a larger narrative. One beloved side story involves Gesar's horse race, the one that wins him the kingship, and it's often told in its own folk tale, how the scrawny boy Joru, mocked by everyone, rides last in the race until he suddenly reveals the magical horse's speed and overtakes them all. Another standalone tale from the cycle is how Gesar fetched the monsoon from India, a story where Gesar must travel to the land of the Naga spirits to retrieve rainfall for drought-stricken Tibet. So for the Tibetan people, Gesar is not a fictional hero, but he's rather an ideal of the combined spiritual and temporal leadership. They call him a Chakravartin, the ideal king, who wields force not only for good. In times when Tibet lacked political power, the stories of Gesar's victories provided solace and inspiration. And even during the upheavals of 20th century Tibet, some Tibetans would invoke Gesar in their songs as a symbol of hope and the eventual triumph of peace in the land. In a way, Gesar becomes a national epic, reinforcing identity across a widely dispersed population. Nomads in Amdo and farmers in central Tibet alike know some version of a Gesar song. A common lullaby might reference him. A festival play might reenact one of his battles. And indeed, the Tibetan opera repertoire includes episodes of Gesar's life. And this is very well kept alive by the current government in Tibet. You can see it all over television. You go to any place to travel in Tibet, and Gesar is kind of like a national mascot, almost. But let's get away from the grand epics and religious legends for a moment, because Tibet has its own smaller folktales and fables, the kind of stories shared around nomad campfires or told to the kids on winter nights. One prominent category is animal fables, much like Aesop's fables or the Indian Jataka tales. Tibetan folk tales frequently feature talking animals who display human-like virtues and folly. However, Tibetan animal stories have their own local flair. A classic example is the tale of the tiger and the frog. In this story, a ferocious old tiger named Tsuden is out hunting and comes upon a tiny frog. The tiger is about to make a quick meal of him, but the clever frog boldly asserts, "Where are you off to, big brother?" Surprised, the tiger admits that he's hungry. The frog then boasts that he is the king of frogs, a mighty creature not to be trifled with, and he challenges the tiger to a jumping contest across the river. Amused by this, the tiger agrees. When the tiger leaps mightily, the frog cunningly bites onto the tiger's tail, so that when the tiger lands on the far bank and turns, the frog is already there behind him, having been carried by the tiger's jump. Well, the tiger's obviously quite perplexed at how the tiny frog outleaped him, and next agrees to a contest of vomiting up their last meals. I know, a little bit strange, but stay with me. Well, the tiger, not eaten, can only cough up a little bile, but the frog spits out some tiger hair, because, as he claims, "I ate a tiger yesterday, and these are the leftovers." At this point, the tiger loses its nerve, thinking this small frog must indeed be a fearsome being who even eats tigers. The frog's coup de grace comes from when the tiger returns with a skeptical fox who doesn't believe that the frog is dangerous at all. The frog sees the tiger and the fox tied together by their tails. An extra detail, by the way, the tiger, afraid to face the frog alone, had tied himself to the fox so they wouldn't flee separately. The frog shouts to the fox, "Hey, why have you brought that dog here for my dinner?" The terrified tiger, thinking the fox led him into a trap to be eaten, panics and runs, dragging the poor fox behind him. And the tale ends humorously with the line, "And if they aren't dead yet, the tiger and fox are still running." Stories like that once again show that theme of wit and cleverness triumphing over brute strength, a favourite theme in not just Tibetan folklore, but pretty much everyone's folklore. The weak but clever frog outsmarts the powerful tiger, and of course it comes with an explicit moral or proverb. In fact, Albert Sherton, an early 20th century collector of Tibetan folk tales, noted that each story in oral tradition was frequently prefaced by a proverb that encapsulated its lesson. For the tiger and the frog, the proverb given was, "The tall strong pine is a great help, for with its support, the weak vine may climb as high." In other words, with cunning or the right ally, the small can overcome the big. Well, many Tibetan folk tales are, of course, cautionary as well, featuring humans. A prevalent character in Central Asian and Tibetan lore is the trickster or the wise fool figure. Sometimes a specific persona, like Aku Tompa, a semi-legendary prankster of sorts. Stories of Aku Tompa are satirical and ribald. He plays tricks on rich lamas and greedy shopkeepers, exposing hypocrisy and making common folk laugh at the high and mighty. These stories serve a social function too, giving the underclass a vicarious victory over the elite. In one such tale, Aku Tompa manages to get a free meal at a monastery by exploiting the monks' desire not to appear inhospitable. He essentially tricks them with wordplays and shamelessness, ending up full of food while the monks shake their heads at his audacity. And then there's another story about how he sold the sound of a temple bell to a merchant for a bag of gold, an impossible sale that he pulled off by a clever con, later using the money to help the poor, so all's well that ends well, I suppose. But there are also fairy tale-like stories of princes and princesses, hidden treasures, magical transformations. For example, one folk tale speaks of Dawa Sangmo, a kind-hearted girl who was mistreated by her cruel stepmother, a tale reminiscent of Cinderella, I suppose. With the help of a magical turquoise bird and through her own virtue, Dawa Sangmo triumphs and marries a prince, while the wicked stepmother faces poetic justice. Tibetan folk tales don't shy away from the macabre or supernatural either, as we saw with the ghost stories. Another notable type of spirit in everyday lore is the Yul Iha, or the local guardian, often ancestral spirits or minor gods tied to a locale. There are funny stories, too, of village priests, lamas or shamans, who have to placate a temperamental Yul Iha that might be causing, well, let's say, a persistent rain that's been messing up the local harvest festival, this kind of thing. So one could imagine how a comedic scenario would occur where offerings kept not being quite right, that is, butter lamps blow out, the goat offered escapes, until the ritual is finally successful and the sun comes out. A particularly Tibetan blend of humor and teaching appears in the tales about reincarnation and karma. For instance, there is a folk tale of a miserly rich man who is reborn as a hungry ghost, doomed eternally to wander in his own treasure rooms, which in death, of course, has become completely useless to him. Another moral about generosity, I suppose. The old saying is, you can't take it with you, right? We're familiar with that in the Western context. Now we also have proverbs and riddles. They're another aspect of Tibetan folk tradition, often interwoven with stories or just perhaps used in a standalone sense. Tibetan social life, especially in pastoral communities, included gatherings where people would challenge each other with riddles or exchanges of witty proverbs. Some folk stories are essentially long riddles. The entire plot is constructed to lead the revealing of a riddle's answer. For example, a story might describe three brothers making a cryptic statement about something they saw, and only at the end do we realize each was describing the same thing in metaphor. Solutions often turn out to be things like the sun, the yurt, or some common object or concept, but just described poetically. This playful intellectual element shows that folklore also served as a bit of a mental exercise too. Of course, we think about the very famous scene in The Hobbit, Riddles in the Dark, that chapter, where Gollum and Bilbo are sort of trying to outsmart each other with these kinds of riddles and stories. Now, another cherished component is also songs and ballads. Not every oral tradition is a full epic. There's also short songs that encapsulate a story. Nomadic herders might sing a ballad or two about lovers separated by a mountain, or a humorous little song about a rogue yak that stole barley from a storeroom. Some songs double as children's rhymes, teaching counting or the names of animals in a rhythmic way. But through all these tales there runs an emphasis on virtues such as cleverness, kindness, and humility. In Tibetan folk ethics, arrogance is quite sharply ridiculed. Misers and braggarts always get their comeuppance, while the humble, compassionate protagonist, even if weak or disadvantaged, finds allies or ingenious solutions to solve problems. And the tales also reinforce a Buddhist-influenced moral outlook. The idea that doing good brings good, and doing evil leads to one's downfall. However, it's not delivered like a sermon, but rather as a narrative truth. The listener infers the karmic lesson by seeing it play out in real time. And that's where we ended off today for Tibetan folklore. You really do need to get yourself to Tibet. It's quite a fascinating place. Truly. Definitely worth the trip. But like I said in my other video about Tibet, you really must drive. It's well, international driver's licenses you can't really use them in China. So book a trip or something like that. Not a Kentucky tour. Do not go on a Kentucky tour. All it is a big drink up. You don't want to go on them. Go on something like G Adventures or Intrepid or something like that. They're a bit better. In any case, I am going to, I'm not sponsored, by the way. I just wanted to, just saying. I will thank my top tier patrons and supporters who are supporting me. If Intrepid or G Adventures is listening, perhaps you'll support me one day too. I don't know. In any case, we have Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Gary, Charlene, Lynn, Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfred, Neil, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuronerd, Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Ryan, Thor, Cameron, Stefan, Kevin, HMSHH, Crystal, Towery, Anthony, Lucy, Brandon, Gugu Bubonic, Nicholas, Craig, Neftus, Alexander, Gokhan, Dorsey, Venita, Claire, Courtesy, Carol, Robert, Mary, Bridget, Nefertari, Yvette, Miss Mochi, 11, Allison, Free American, Jennifer, Brittany, David, Cody, Brian, Are You My Mum, Rhonda, Carrie, Catty P, Lovely, and yep, that's it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I will see you when you feel inclined to return, whenever that is. Good night for now, lots of love to you all, and farewell.